We have another campaign like United 24. At least our public authority also started to make efforts to make Ukraine visible in the world, and started this fight for truth about Ukraine in the world discourse. And of course, in this case, usual citizens, like everybody, all Ukrainians must be united, and we need really concrete messages in this case. On our resources, we asked our auditory, as an educational center, we work with teachers, with parents and with kids, with teenagers. We asked them to answer on such a question like, you are Ukrainian because what? Why do you think that you are Ukrainian? And I even did not expect that it will become so like popular, because I think every person in our community tried to write answer. And I tried to unite all these answers in such groups. And I asked my colleague and my friend from the Institute of Ukrainian Institute of Future, Mykola Skriba, to analyze these answers and to give some comment about them. I won't, of course, read all of this. You can read yourself, or make a picture and then read, but it's really interesting, and it was very interesting for me as well. Also, this is, I think, and the last sentence is mine. Yes, because he received a pre-education, got married, gave birth to children, and have my favorite job. It's what why a lot of people ask me why before the war, why do you like Ukrainian? Why you are so patriot, something like that. And I always did not understand why I must be not patriot. I have everything in my country. Why I must be not patriot? Yes. And Mykola, he commented these answers, and really it's interesting that there are a lot of stereotypes. Ukrainian stereotypes about Ukraine, and all of them are from 19th, 20th centuries. Really, they are rather ancient. They are like rather romantic, romanticized from our literature and our art. And it is obvious that now we need like new stereotypes, and they are now born during this war. And some of them will die, but some of them will be alive, and they will become a new code of our nation, and they will be known, like people will recognize Ukraine through them. But here we of course need media literacy and civic education, and it is not only about Ukraine, it's about citizens of all European countries, because we really need to make a difference between more or less true and obvious fakes. If we put in Google Ukraine is, you will see a lot of websites, but almost all of them will be about Ukraine as a charming country with very beautiful women and adorable nature. And almost no website will tell you about our fight for our independence for more than 5 centuries. No website will tell you so much about, for example, the importance for the world about our agriculture industry. Yeah, as we see now, that not only gas is important for safe in Europe and the world. And it's interesting that only on Britain website there is such information, even not on ours, unfortunately. I hope Ukrainian also resources will correct it. And of course, it's not what maybe I personally would want to see about Ukraine in the world internet and discourse in general, because like we are not cute. We are really very brave, very strong, very tolerant. We are very creative, really very creative, and we are very hardworking and native and calm. And for me, it really is very important give Europe and the whole world opportunity to learn about us, to know about us more, and maybe to change their thoughts about us and about our nation. And here is important. It's time to know about us from us, not through Moscow censor. It's time to put off this. I don't like this. This thing that really usually Europe got used to know about Ukraine, from Moscow resources. And now it's time to change it, absolutely, and I hope for. I took with myself 2 books to show you. I think Ukrainians maybe know about this resource, Ukrainian for other countries. I think it will be interesting. This is my colleagues and friends, it's one of my most favorite resources about Ukraine, because it's like not formal. There are huge tons of stories about just usual people, but then all these people are not usual, they're unique, and in these stories it is Ukraine, really. If you want to know more, please go there. And now you see there are almost maybe most popular languages already, and they are also in Instagram already, and in Facebook, I don't know if in Telegram, but in any case there are more than 20 languages already translated. It's huge work, and I really love them. I wanted to present you. You see, one and another one. You can maybe, if it will be interesting for you. You can because there are a lot of pictures, and you can see. I'm sure it will be. And for me, it's such example of such successful cultural diplomacy, because it's very creative, really. It's very honest. It's very high quality. It's very actual, and it's system approach, because all these points are really done. And if we ask how to make it effective cultural diplomacy, for me, this is pretending. And I think I will give a broad detail, because the next part is.
Hi. yeah, I hope everyone's still energetic and able to listen because my voice tends to put people to sleep, so especially when it's in microphones, so yeah, I'll try to not do that. About this part that we're talking, maybe this part will go more in the direction of how to be the annoying person who always corrects others instead of not to be. But you know, sometimes it's also necessary to shake things a little bit, and that we're used to. But yeah, as it was told, I work between art and anthropology, which is something I'm gonna talk maybe a little bit in the second part. But today, when we were talking what I could present today, what could be my contribution to that and to cultural diplomacy, I thought, I've done a lot of projects about food and contemporary art. And I thought it would be a really interesting way to talk about some of the topics we were discussing today. What was interesting that I observed was that in every single part today there was a topic of food came up during the discussions and in private discussions, but also here today. And then even your list, one of the lines was about food as well. It is a very important and interesting cultural marker that we all have, and I think we all have a lot to say. It's really a great way and tool to bring people together. It's also a source of a lot of stereotypes, then it's also a source of breaking those stereotypes. It could be played around. And it's something that is a very delicate play between personal and collective, to come from an anthropological perspective. And I think this is where it is very helpful to, approach, in this case, food, but then also to approach some of the topics that we were talking about today, because another thing is that it also tends to get quite nationalistic in its understanding, and I think today there's been a lot of decolonializing and colonization and this context discussed, and I think it's equally important to talk about also issues of nationalism and how that is problematic as well in certain sense, and then the nation states that I think Moka mentioned during her talk, and we were talking about it also earlier, and maybe, sometimes it's not time to talk about nationalism because there's other problems, but I don't think, it is time also to talk about that because, it could cause equal problems. And some of the things that I want to talk about food is also connected to this, in a way, maybe nationalistic approach that people have taken, especially after the Soviet Union, sort of as a response. And then, anything that takes radical side is not helpful either way. So, so I'm gonna tell you about, I think, three things that I've done, 3 moments of food in my life, let's call it, and in my work. But I was thinking to talk about borscht and the whole recipe that was coming up. Maybe we keep it for the discussion part because, I'm gonna go with other things now, but we can come back to that if it feels like it's a topic, in the group, and it was also mentioned, in the workshop part, I think, but So, first one is about the dumplings. I'm gonna go a little more broader than the Eastern Partnership countries and more global. I was in a project called the New Dictionary of Old Ideas that was dealing with the idea of Central Europe and the idea of Central in Europe. With the countries, Czech Republic, Poland, Georgia, and Spain. I was involved as an exhibition co-curator and during residences there. I started researching, as part of my research, ideas around dumplings, because every country has certain kind of dumplings and it's a topic and everyone, it's much loved food, a lot of people enjoy it. And one thing that was very interesting about it is actually something that all of you probably have in your smartphones now, the emojis, which many of us use. I'm pretty confused how to use them, but it's thing that I think everyone's pretty confused, And there's a dumpling emoji. If you have it in your phone, you can look it up, how it looks like, because it's quite an interesting story. And it's very recent, not very recent anymore, but in 2015 there were 2 girls chatting, talking about going to have Chinese dumplings, and one of them wanted to send the emoji, and she discovered there's no emoji for dumplings. So they decided to do a campaign and figure out how to get a dumpling in the emoji world. Turns out it's a very complicated process. No, seriously. It took them 2 years. There's something called Unicode Consortium, where there's like a lot of people who make decisions. They had to attend a lot of meetings. They started Kickstarter for their organization, or initiative which is called, I think, Nation. They then joined the consortium. It's like a whole story. It's really amazing. And then there was a lot of discussion what this dumpling should look like. Because not in every country, but like there's very different types of dumplings, you know? And then in the end, what they decided, apparently the consortium gives certain rules on like the perspective of the image and something, but then each platform can decide on their own form within it, but like it has to be a grouping consortium so that it shows up. I'm very technical. I was like, wow. And then it turns out dumplings on different platforms have different shapes. So, you know, like that's sort of like how broad things can go in terms of like, and then I was thinking about, you know, like these emojis that have like you press on it and then it gives you different options to choose from. And I was like, oh, maybe they do it for dumplings too. And then there were like momos and tikali and halushka and, you know, like all sorts of platforms. But they haven't done it yet, but I think we should wait for it. It's going to come out. And then what I thought would be interesting thing to do, I Googled dumplings as we all do, and I went on Wikipedia to read how this source defines dumplings. And because, I'm talking about it very lightly, but I was working on the idea of, you know, like sort of like the maps and representations and how, you know, things have been changing over the years and how they can be confusing and overlapping when we try to put things into certain categories. And of course it has geographical sort of like definitions of dumplings, categories to choose. And then I took the coloring maps of Europe, printed them on semi-transparent papers, and for each like Central Europe, there was like Eastern Europe, I started coloring which countries they were saying was in each one, and then I overlapped them to see if there was overlapping. There were a few countries that, even with the definitions of dumplings, fell in a few categories. So, you know, like if something so easy can go as broadly, you can imagine when a lot of other things come into play and like how hard it becomes to represent all this. And then good luck representing your country with dumplings on an international gathering, you know. Yeah, so that's why maybe they come up with different names, I don't know. But then on the same program, I think it was the presentation where I presented these maps, I also made a cake. I usually do like food, cooking and presentation when I'm talking about food, but sorry about today. But let's imagine, you know, think about it, because I think it's an also important part of that, seriously. And yeah, there was I think last time that I publicly made Prague cake. Now this goes into something very personal to me. Prague cake is something that my family has been doing since I remember myself. It's on every occasion. It's like, you know, it's Prague cake. Like, you gotta have Prague cake. You know, it's a nice thing. Maybe some of you also know about it. And then I have family members in Prague, and when they went there, I was asking my aunt, like, how's the Prague cake there? And she was like, guess what? They don't know what it is. I was like, what? Like, Prague cake, Prague. Now, turns out, after some research, it is actually a Soviet cake that was invented in, I think, Moscow, in a restaurant called Hotel Restaurant Prague, hence the name, that then became very popular, and that's how, and then the recipe that I looked up is not really the same that my grandmother had that we're using, so I was like, oh, like, you know, that's how things change. But and then I was like, I did this cake for some projects to talk about this topic, but then I was like I really need to make it in Prague, you know, like to present it there. But this is, I think, this very personal aspect of food as well, because I was initially making it as something that was like very close to me as my story and my family story, you know, as a cake to talk about it, but then it turns out it actually reveals a lot more. It reveals, you know, a story of something that, you know, like shows basically this geographical confusion through the cakes and stuff, and then, you know, it came through that. So when I represent things through food, I want to challenge things like this, and also, you know, like to think a little bit more what food could mean in terms of collective understanding, but also in terms of the personal. And then, of course, it generates a lot of discussion and brings a lot of topics out. And the last one that I want to talk about is the project, which probably comes the closest to the cultural diplomacy through food. That was in 2014, and during those years, my colleague Nini Palomnichvili and I were doing a lot of projects on food. And we were invited in Poland, in Gallery Arsenal in Białystok, on an exhibition called Deprivation that dealt with the topic of migration and the accompanying social, economic, political, psychological issues. A lot of artists from post-Soviet countries, or like Eastern Partnership particularly, but also, yeah, so, you know, like the gathering, and then we're like, what do we do, you know, like with food, and then we thought like, oh, you know, like how, and especially coming from Georgia, like there's certain expectations, you know, when I'm talking about stereotypes, that like, oh, like, there's international culture night in food, the Georgians will do the food. I'm like, what should we I mean, I could, but like, why not others? You know, and then everyone's like, oh, like, hey, will you make chingan? I don't even eat meat. Like, I mean, I could, but yeah, that's like the stereotypical part of it. Not like the worst thing that someone asks you, but you know, still, there's expectations to that. And then we're like, oh, like, let's do the international food night as well. Like, I've studied a lot, I've traveled a lot, I've participated in a lot of this, and then there's always confusion because this, I mean, the way food, like, you know, food develops and stuff, of course, like, they don't fall necessarily within the exact margins of the countries as we know today, because, you know, things have been changing throughout history, especially in border regions. It gets like particularly complicated when someone makes something to represent their country and someone else is offended because, oh no, this represents my country. Why can't it represent both of you? You know, like I know all of you, but we're like, okay, let's do the International Food Night in the program. This is where it got really disappointing for people, but it was kind of an idea. So we asked the participants of the exhibition in prior to bring food that they would associate with their country of origin, or the food they would miss when they were traveling, because we didn't want to just talk about, and when I work on food, I don't want to always talk about just the collective and the idea part of it. I like to also talk about essential, like the senses, you know, the smell, the memory, not just as a collective thing, but also as like my very personal thing. And we asked them to bring these kind of food items, whatever they could think of. And then we collected little stories, and then we attached to them at the exhibition opening, in a big gallery, serious show. We were sitting in the entrance, this stuff presented with the labels. We were frying sunflower seeds and eating them as we were talking, because that's what you do, right? And you know, we also wanted to show that. And then a few days after, there was the International Food Night. People were excited, you know, like Georgian last names, they're gonna do international. We put the title in quotation marks, but you'd be surprised that people don't pay attention to these things. So what we did then, you know, it was a lot of people, I was like, oh my God. And we put like these food ingredients on the big table. We were like a cooking show, you know. We had the cooker and the like, properly prepared. We were talking about this idea of food and traveling and all that stuff. I was making, I think, buckwheat pancakes, because buckwheat strangely comes up as a very important thing in Eastern Partnership countries at least, and people who travel, because, you know, it was not available apparently some years ago. Now it's available everywhere, I think. Yeah, and we were talking about it, and then what we asked people, and they were like, waiting, you know, there's gonna be I was like, no, sorry. What we told people, like, you can eat anything that's on the table, and the ingredients were stuff like, I mean, there were like stuff, something very personal, but I like the mix because we also asked like artists to bring it, so, you know, like they thought about it creatively. It was some like fruits or vegetables from people's gardens, it was like pickles, there was condensed milk, you know, skushanka, there was vodka, somebody brought wine, there was chocolate from Czech Republic, I think. There was, you know, something like not necessarily associated with the country, but like sometimes also like that. I don't think anyone brought buckwheat though, I think we had to buy buckwheat. But anyway, what else was there? Yeah, some stuff from Georgia, there was some cheese, a lot of different things. And we asked people, like, you can eat anything you want, but because the exhibition was also called Deprivation, and we wanted to highlight how, you know, we're deprived of the senses when we are leaving the country that we travel, we told them there's just one rule. You cannot eat just one ingredient. You have to mix and make up your own recipes. People are really creative. Like, we offered some of them, but they were not that disappointed in the end, you know, like, because, like, you know, understood what it was for. But the whole idea that we wanted to present it is to sort of like, first go against the stereotype of, like this is the food we're going to be presenting necessarily, but also to really think about what, a person doesn't necessarily have to, like, for different reasons of migration, but, like when you are relocated from the area that, like the things that you start to miss, and how food is like collective on that level, but also it is personal. And oftentimes there's both of this involved, if you ask me, and I think this is what's also important if if you want to present your culture and yourself, like to present it not in this sort of like a set given thing that was like told to us, because like this is what your country's food is, this is what you represent. I think it's more like that's important, heritage that comes, but it's also how it comes to you and how you make a version of it, because I think I would be much more comfortable to do a vegetarian version of khinkali, which of course originally was not an option, because that's something closer to me if I want to represent, the food and my heritage and my culture in terms of how I grew up. But then it would be this play with the collective and the personal. So I think this interplay is very, very, very important and also very valid, because a lot of times we think we are not allowed to express our personal because it's a sad thing. No, I think we are initiated because that's sort of like where it comes through, the truth, because we are living this life as humans.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that the thing about the images, it's a lot about the narrative, yeah? And narratives, the simpler they are, the easier it is to promote them. And let's say, to come back to borscht, actually, to say borscht is Ukrainian is a simple narrative. And it gets more complex if you start asking, so what is borscht? And yeah, my question would be to you, how do you deal with this complexity within the country? When it comes to like, okay, so if there is no potato in borscht, it's not borscht. If like there is no, if you add buckwheat there, you destroy it. And so on and so on. But actually everyone is so precious about their own recipe, and they demand it also to be protected by UNESCO then. Yeah, so what do you do about this complexity within the country? How can we actually make it more inclusive and diverse? How can we promote more complex narratives? What is your experience?
I'll just continue with food since we were talking, and then transition to education as well. I mean, it is connected, right? Yeah, the borscht topic, it is going to come up, right? I mean, it's also, it's not about giving it a status. I don't think UNESCO gives status, and it's also in the description if you read. I was reading about it coming here. They're not assigning that borscht is a Ukrainian thing. They're giving it a heritage status in terms of, people gather as like a performative action and sort of like a tradition of it, of making, and it was reviewed because people unfortunately have to leave and, cannot gather together, and, it's important in that sense, but it's also important in the sense, I believe, that, in disinformation that we're talking about here, because I mean, in this current position, and we know how this propaganda machine works, they will use probably anything, that they can in that sense to, underrepresent things or misrepresent things, etc. But what I find useful, and it is time demanding, it is, it takes energy and time, how to, get this information, but how to actually. It's more about to involve people in deciding, what to present. And of course, it is not easy. It's easier just to, appoint one person who decides what to present and how. But I worked a lot also within Georgia. If I can bring maybe some more examples from my work, that I find this very powerful tool, but also outside of Georgia in different projects. And since we're talking about Ukraine, I had a residency in Melitopol in, I think, 2015, which was with a Ukrainian organization Open Place and Melitopol Museum of Local Lore. And it was a fantastic experience. It was a very short-term residency, but museum wanted to do a project with Open Place about community, involving people in the community, and involving community in the museum, we had this food projects, and they invited us to do a project about food, and it was really, really beautiful experience. And we were sitting in the museum, and of course, like, my idea was not to teach women in their 40s or 50s about food in Melitopol, you know, like, I mean, it was a really fun dynamics. They came, they were like, let me tell you, boy, how it's I was like, that's what I want, please tell me. So we wanted them to, you know, to get involved with the museum and to bring, like, sort of like to make this connection that museum, like, you know, all the other narratives and everything is not just this sort of like frozen things about something in the past that we had nothing to do about. That is, you know, like it comes from living, you know.